bloody pass in Italy. It's strange how memory works, especially when it comes to the things that haunt you. The stuff that stays with you, like ghosts that never leave. You think you're past it, that you've buried it deep, but the moment you close your eyes, it all comes rushing back. The mountains, the cold, the sound of gunfire ripping through the stillness, and him. The one you couldn't save. I was just a kid back then, barely 20, but I had already learned the hardest lesson of war. Nothing is ever as it seems. It was the winter of 1944 when my platoon was sent up into the mountains of northern Italy. We were part of an operation to push the Germans out of the region, a key position that would give us the upper hand as we advanced toward the heart of Europe. But if you've ever been to Italy, you know that those mountains have a way of making you feel small. You can't understand how hostile a place can be until you're surrounded by endless peaks, all of them covered in thick snow, all of them hiding an enemy who's ready to kill you if you so much as twitch. The Germans had been dug in for months, holding on to that pass with everything they had. We didn't have the luxury of time on our side, but we also didn't have the option to fail. Our orders were clear: take the pass or risk losing the entire front. It wasn't just about the terrain. It was about the pride of an army that had seen so much bloodshed. And so we climbed. I remember the bitter cold creeping into my bones, the snow falling in fat flakes, turning everything white and blinding. We moved as quietly as we could, each step careful, knowing that any sound could give us away. I was a sniper in a small, specialized unit. We were there to take out key targets, the ones who could stop our advance, like the machine gun nest we had learned to fear. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't about glory. It was about survival. The first shot rang out at dawn. I was in position, set up on a ridge overlooking the valley. The air was thin, hard to breathe, and my fingers were stiff from the cold. My rifle was like an extension of my body. I didn't have to think when I took that shot. I saw him, one of the German soldiers, poking his head out from behind a rock, and without hesitation, I squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit its mark, and the soldier dropped. Plain, simple. But it was only the beginning. The Germans were ready for us. We hadn't even made it halfway up the pass when the first barrage of machine gun fire came down on us. I didn't even hear the rounds at first, just the sound of our men screaming, the crunch of snow under heavy boots, and the rapid-fire bursts of the guns. It was chaos, pure chaos. We had no choice but to take cover. We scrambled behind boulders and trees, trying to keep our heads down, trying to breathe, trying to stay alive. I had no idea how many of us were still standing. There were shouts, orders being barked, the sound of a grenade exploding in the distance. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of it pressing down on me. But then I saw him. My best friend, Charlie. He was a big guy, strong, always the first one to jump into the fray. He was just a few feet from me when he went down, his legs buckling under him as the machine gun fire tore into him. The blood. It was everywhere. In that moment, I froze. I didn't know what to do. We were trained for this, sure, but no amount of training can prepare you for that. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, but I had to push it down. I had to focus. I wasn't just a soldier in that moment. I was a sniper, and my job was to take out the enemy before they could take us out. I couldn't let Charlie's death be for nothing. I couldn't just let the Germans have the pass. I knew the machine gun was somewhere up ahead, tucked behind a set of trees, guarded by two men who were making sure no one could move forward. I had a choice: stay here, try to help Charlie, or risk my life to take out the enemy and give our guys a chance to advance. I was alone with that decision. I don't think anyone else knew what I was thinking. Everyone was too busy trying to stay alive. But I knew the only way to end this was to take that shot. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. It's easy to say later that it was the right choice, but at the time, it felt like I was betraying everything I stood for. I left Charlie where he lay and moved toward the ridge. It felt like an eternity, every second stretched out in the thick, heavy air. The snow crunched under my boots, and every noise seemed amplified. I got into position, my heart pounding in my chest, the world shrinking to the scope in front of me. I found them. The two Germans. They were huddled behind the trees, their eyes scanning the area, unaware of my presence. I set my crosshairs on the first man and fired. He dropped. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Just one shot, one kill. But there was still the other. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The pressure was unreal. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the weight of the rifle in my hands. I pulled the trigger again, and the second soldier fell. The machine gun went silent. For a moment, there was nothing but the cold wind and the silence of the mountains. I couldn't hear anything else, not the shouts of my comrades, not the thudding of my own heartbeat. It was like time stopped. But then it all came crashing back. The fight was far from over. The battle for that pass had just begun. The snow was red. Not from the blood, though, at least not at first. It was just the way the light hit it, the deep crimson of the early afternoon sun slicing through the cloud cover, painting everything in a shade of death. I knew, though, that this wasn't the moment to stand around contemplating things. This wasn't the time to admire the view. The battle was still raging, the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and the screams of the wounded echoing through the valley. I'd done what I had to do. The machine gun was silenced, at least for the moment. But the enemy wasn't going to roll over and die just because I had taken out 2 of their men. No, they weren't that kind of enemy. The Germans in these mountains were stubborn, relentless. They fought like they had nothing to lose, and in many ways they didn't. They had their orders, and they would follow them to the end. I didn't even have a chance to check on Charlie. I couldn't. There were other men in trouble. The unit was scattered, some trying to climb higher up the mountain, others dug in, waiting for a chance to push forward. But I knew deep down that if I didn't take another shot, if I didn't continue pushing the attack, it was all going to fall apart. The pass would remain in German hands, and all those lives we'd already lost would have been for nothing. I was snapped out of my thoughts when I heard the crackle of my radio. It was Captain Harris, our leader. His voice was sharp, tense. "Collins, are you in position?" I looked around, scanning the ridge for any movement. The snow had fallen heavier now, and the mist in the air was thickening. My eyes narrowed as I surveyed the battlefield, trying to pick out any sign of movement. My rifle felt heavy against my shoulder, but was as familiar as my own skin. "I'm here," I responded, my voice steady despite the chaos surrounding me. "Good. We need you to clear that upper ridge," Harris said, his voice clipped, urgent. "They've got snipers up there, and they're picking us off one by one. We can't move forward without taking them out." Snipers. The word rang in my head the way it always did. They were the worst kind of enemy. They didn't need to charge at you, didn't need to storm your position. They could be anywhere, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to end your life. The thought of them lurking in the snow, hidden behind rocks or trees, gave me a feeling in the pit of my stomach. They were ghosts, but that's what I was trained to deal with. I made my way toward a ridge, staying low, moving like a shadow through the snow. I knew that getting too close would make me an easy target. The snow might help conceal me, but also made every movement painfully obvious. Every time I shifted, I could hear the crunch beneath my boots, the telltale sound that could betray my position. The wind picked up, stinging my face with icy fingers. I pulled my collar tighter and kept my eyes on the ridge ahead. It was a waiting game now. Every second counted. Every step I took could be the last. And then I saw them. 2 figures crouched low in the snow, their rifles aimed down the slope. They were German snipers, no doubt about it. They hadn't seen me yet, but they were close. Too close. The only thing I could do was take the shot and take it fast. I didn't have the luxury of waiting for a perfect moment. I had to trust my instincts, trust the training that had been drilled into me day after day. I set up my rifle, taking slow, controlled breaths. The world seemed to shrink. It was just me, the snipers, and the pass. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, each pulse a reminder that my next move would decide everything. I aimed carefully at the first sniper. He was tall, his silhouette barely visible against the snow. The crosshairs found their mark, steady and true. I squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, loud enough to pierce the silence of the mountains. He dropped. But the other one, he was faster. He ducked, rolling out of sight just as I pulled the trigger. My second shot missed. I cursed under my breath. It was a mistake, one that could cost me, cost all of us. I didn't have time to dwell on it, though. I had to reload and take another shot before he found me. I heard him now, his boots crunching in the snow, moving fast. He wasn't running, but he was closing the distance. I could hear him, could feel him getting closer. He was moving in for the kill. I had no choice but to act. I threw myself to the side, shifting my position, trying to get a better angle. I was exposed, and I knew it. But I didn't have a choice. I waited, barely breathing, praying that he wouldn't spot me. The seconds stretched on forever. Finally, I saw him peeking over a rock. Just a flash of his helmet. I took my shot. The bullet hit him square in the chest. He didn't even have time to react before he crumpled to the ground. For a moment, everything was still. I was too numb to feel relief, too focused on what had just happened. There was no room for celebration in this line of work. But I knew that I had done what had to be done. Another threat neutralized. I scanned the area one last time, making sure there were no more surprises. The wind howled around me, carrying with it the scent of gunpowder and blood. It was an all too familiar smell. The radio crackled again. It was Harris. Good work, Collins. We're moving forward. Stay sharp. There's more to come. More to come. There's always the same. Just when you thought it was over, just when you thought you had a moment to breathe, the war pushed you back into the chaos. The mountains weren't done with us yet. I glanced one last time at the pass. We were still so far from the top, so far from victory. And every step felt heavier than the last. The ridge seemed to stretch forever, a never-ending line of jagged rock and swirling snow. Even the brightest moments of sunlight that managed to break through the heavy clouds did little to warm the air or soften the harsh landscape. Everything around me was coated in a layer of cold, both the ground beneath my feet and the weight in my chest. The sound of gunfire echoed from all sides, the rhythm of battle setting the pace as we advanced, inch by inch, toward the heart of the pass. There was a certain kind of numbness that comes with survival. You don't feel anything, at least not in the way you should. Every step, every shot becomes mechanical. It's like you're watching yourself from a distance, detached, moving through the motions as if your own body isn't quite your own anymore. I had lost track of how many times I'd fired that day, how many lives I'd taken. But I couldn't afford to think about it. Not now. There was too much at stake. Captain Harris had called for reinforcements, but we couldn't afford to wait for them. The Germans were digging in, and every second we gave them was another second they had to tighten their grip on the pass. So we pushed forward, moving with a quiet intensity, our movements synchronized like the beat of a drum. But despite our discipline, despite our training, I could feel the tension building in the air. The enemy was close, and they knew we were coming. By now, we were deep into the heart of the German position. The snow was packed thick underfoot, but there were signs of the enemy everywhere. The tracks in the snow, the faintest hint of movement behind rocks, the shadowy figures barely visible in the distance. We had crossed into enemy territory, and the only thing between us and them was the sharp, unforgiving landscape. I kept my rifle close, my eyes scanning the terrain, my ears listening for any hint of danger. The mountains were eerily quiet now, the sound of combat fading as we drew nearer to our target. It was almost as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. And then it came. The explosion was deafening. It shook the ground beneath us and sent a cloud of snow and debris into the air. I barely had time to react before I was thrown to the ground by the force of the blast. The world spun around me, my ears ringing, and I struggled to find my bearings. I tried to push myself up, but the snow was too deep, too thick. My hands were numb from the cold, and my legs felt like they were made of lead. I had to fight to stay conscious, to stay focused. Somehow, I managed to crawl behind a nearby rock, pulling my rifle along with me. The blast had thrown off my aim, and I knew that if I didn't find my footing quickly, I would be a sitting duck. I couldn't afford to make another mistake. Not now. I heard the shouting then, the unmistakable voices of German soldiers advancing through the smoke and snow. They were coming for us, and they were coming fast. I glanced around for any sign of my comrades, but the blast had scattered us. The only thing I could see were shadows moving between the trees, flashes of light as gunfire erupted from the distance. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. My rifle was ready. I had trained for this moment, just like I had trained for every other battle. The enemy was close, but I wasn't about to let them win. Not this time. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands gripping the rifle so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The air around me felt thick, charged with anticipation, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Then I saw him, a soldier barely a few yards away. He was moving cautiously, checking behind rocks, keeping his head down. He hadn't seen me yet. I had a moment, just a brief moment, to take the shot. It was a split-second decision, but it was the only one I had. I raised my rifle and took aim. But then something stopped me. A memory. A flash of Charlie's face, his blood-soaked uniform, his lifeless eyes staring at the sky. A wave of guilt hit me like a freight train, and for just a moment, I couldn't bring myself to fire. I could feel the weight of his death pressing down on me, dragging me under, threatening to swallow me whole. I wanted to scream, to throw my rifle down and run away, but I knew I couldn't. Not now. If I hesitated for even a second longer, it would be my life on the line, and I wasn't about to let that happen. I took the shot. The soldier dropped, crumpling to the ground without a sound. I felt a cold, twisted satisfaction in the kill, but it was fleeting. It was nothing like the triumph I had imagined. It felt hollow, empty, and yet I couldn't stop. The war had a way of pulling you back, of making you forget what was right and what was wrong. In the end, it didn't matter. It only mattered that you kept moving forward, that you survived. I pressed on, climbing higher, my eyes always scanning, always alert. We had to reach the top, had to break through the German lines. But the closer we got, the more I felt the weight of the decision I had made. The more I realized that there was no way out of this. No easy answers. It was then that I saw it. Just a flicker in the distance, the shadow against the snow. A figure moving fast. A German soldier, alone, trying to make a run for it. He was no threat to us. Not yet. But something about his frantic movement caught my attention. He was running toward something. Toward us. Toward the final line of defense. I didn't know what it meant, but I didn't have time to think. My training kicked in, and I moved to intercept him, my rifle aimed at his chest. But he was fast. He knew what he was doing. Just as I was about to pull the trigger, he dropped to the ground, disappearing into the snow. I stopped. For a moment, everything went still. My breath came in short gasps as I waited, the rifle still in my hands, my finger poised over the trigger. And then I understood. He wasn't running toward us. He was running from something. Behind him, just over the ridge, a shadow rose. It wasn't a soldier. It was something worse. The rest of us never had a chance to see what it was. I tried to tell myself that the men who fell that day died for something. That they gave everything for the cause, for the freedom of their country. But the truth is, there's no glory in it. There's no sense of honor in what we did. It was just survival. And in the end, survival was the only thing that mattered. I don't know if I was ever truly ready for what happened next. I don't know if anyone was. But what I do know is that when I walked away from that mountain, I carried more than just the weight of my rifle. I carried the ghosts.